So first off, Dan, I really want to start by saying thank you so much for joining me today. And also thank you for your work throughout the years. I first became aware of your material from Drunvalo Melchizedek's The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life. He talked a lot about your science and your studies on really the DNA molecule and how it's dodecahedral and icosahedral and the sacred geometry of our biology and of our genetics even. And so I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about that and maybe even relate that with like the science and the physics of ascension, because this is a big point of interest for a lot of us in spirit science and spirit mysteries. And I'd love to hear about like your research and where that's taken you.
Well, yes, our most recent series of films are on the physics of ascension. And it is true that I did some of the original mapping on the DNA. I have those images handy on the physics of DNA, dodeca ratchet. Let me try the little share screen here thing a minute. One moment. Let's just see if this.
Yeah, please.
Are you seeing my screen here?
Yes, I am.
Good. So the idea is that the DNA, as we know, mapped geometrically, is essentially a ratcheted dodecahedron down a helix, where the increment horizontal of turn is golden ratio squared, the vertical increment of turn is golden ratio, and the radius of the turn is golden ratio cubed. And that provides a path for a certain wave mechanic. Now, what I pioneered was the measurement of heart coherence. Here you see here the power spectrum of EKG during love, and the measurement above here, at my suggestion by Glenn Ryan, of the presence of the enzyme which measures the density of braiding. So essentially what's happening in the DNA helix, we strongly believe, which you see in some of these other images down here. Let me see if, yeah, that's the animation, that the braid within the braid of the DNA responds mechanically to a piezoelectric phonon. Here we have helix here somewhere. This is all at goldenmean.info/DNA manifesto. So the whole visual series is there. I particularly wanted to show you that the braid of the braid of the braid in the braid of the DNA, here's a picture, results in a geometry which is literally electrically implosive, and that's measurable. So when you feel that rush of love where your heart phonon cascade generate a piezoelectric field, your DNA responds piezoelectrically because of that golden ratchet phase conjugated fractal implosive geometric structure. The DNA responds by imploding, literally. And here's actually a photomicrograph of the DNA as a toroid, toroidal DNA. There's a lot of articles about it. And it basically becomes a plasma donut. Now, what does that have to do with ascension? We believe that in the presence of human bliss, measured not just by EKG coherence, when I discovered and invented the concept of heart coherence, now at our realheartcoherence.com technologies, but also in the brainwave, and you saw some pictures there, and you can see it at flameinmind.com, where the brainwave makes a golden ratio frequency cascade, alpha, beta, etc. And so your brainwaves are imploding and your heart's becoming a laser phonon geometry, and the electrical result is a compression field, which your DNA responds by implosively braiding. And that spin density is called going to the next dimension because it shows up as an additional harmonics in the power spectrum of the heart, which is how immune health is measured in medicine. It's called harmonic inclusive or fractal heart rate variability. And that spin density and superposed harmonic inclusiveness results in the throat of that vortex. I suppose I should have got my donut out here, but in the throat of that vortex, the transverse electromagnetic is converted down that golden spiral on the cone of caduceus, literally, and out the squirt gun of that toothpaste tube at the Planck threshold, golden ratio exponents of Planck produce all the critical harmonics. It's called origin of biological net entropy. So out that toothpaste tubes comes a compressional wave, sometimes incorrectly called scalar or torsional. Correct term is a longitudinal EMF array. And that is the physics of all action at a distance and the physics, for example, of lucid dreaming, and the only thing you can take through death. And we have proof of that. This is not a speculation. It's the physics of every language we have about spiritual experience, whether it's lucid dreaming, remote viewing, astral travel. In fact, our plasma technology, and I can show you pictures in a minute, therify.net, produces a massive phase conjugate pine cone between plasma tubes, verify.net plasmas. We're doing rejuvenation in 25 countries, pain reduction. It's pretty cool. And we have clear reports we can trigger active lucid dreaming. And we know a parallel to that is the longitudinal coherence induced by sunrise and sunset, like Agnihotra. So once you learn what a longitudinal array is, visualize a fractal or a flower, which is how the Earth grid magnetic nodes cross, where radioactivity is reduced measurably and where Kogi went to make phone calls to ancestors, and where every cathedral, labyrinth, and cozy rev mirror that ever worked is. And if you put the Therify there, or birth or death there, you're more successful. So this is an array called longitudinal electromagnetic. Tesla almost understood, but power at a distance. He almost got it, but didn't understand the longitudinal component, and that longitudinal waves are gravity waves. But anyway, this array of this coherent longitudinal compression array, like Jodie Foster's dodeca in contact, is actually the physics of the electric field called spirit. So just one last thought, and then please more questions. But so many religiously sincere people have somehow got the idea that the electricity that comes out of the wall that you plug into is somehow not loving, but that the electricity they have been calling spiritual is made of a different substance. And that causes a profound and sickening schizophrenia, which means, spirit is one thing, and the electrosmog in this hospital that's preventing me from dying well doesn't matter. And that's a problem. That's schizophrenia, that's separateness, that believing that real spirituality and electric fields are somehow separate. Just as schizophrenic as physicists who believe that gravity and electromagnetism are made of a separate stuff. That schizophrenia is deadly, deadly. And so our task here, and I would carry on after your questions, would be to find a way to convince people that plasma domains, charge fields, can be loving. Well, maybe I sometimes start with talking about why toroidal ball lightning responds so well to telepathy. We know the physics. So.
Wow. I'm amazed. I have to say, there's two things that really impress me right off the bat. One is, of course, your knowledge of and research and information about everything. I think there's such a big rabbit hole here. There's so much for us to learn and go into. But the other thing is actually just your presence. I wanted to compliment you on your, just you're speaking about all of this stuff, but you're coming from such a place of just heart-centered, like heart coherence. It's beautiful. And it's affecting me just by being in your presence. I'm like, I'm feeling it. It's elevating me just by being in your state. So I think that will be something that can be felt. It's so gentle and loving for everyone who's watching.
On my good days, my magic lady here told me, "Are you going to be gentle today?" And I said, "No." So she'll be delighted. No, I really get upset with people who insist on believing that if you study spirituality using physics, it means you don't believe in love. A lot of people actually believe that if you use physics to describe spirituality, that it can't be loving. And that's a problem because the opposite is true. You see, where we're going with this is once you understand this nodal array of longitudinal nodes, the dodeca, Earth grid, et cetera, Jodie Foster context dodeca, et cetera, where Kathy measured radioactive critical mass is reduced, we know why. At that nodal array, we've measured it. That's where the Kogi go to make phone calls to ancestors, and the Aboriginals use the song lines. And we know the physics of why. That longitudinal embedding, that fractal array, rose-like, is DNA radio. There is no other. That is the physics of collective unconscious Akashic records, communion of saints, the Kesjan body of Gurdjieff and the Ba from the Ka of Egyptians. That's the physics.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because, I was talking with Dr. Rupert Sheldrake just recently, and he was describing this sort of model put forth about the different, just like paradigms of understanding, like that there's so many people who exist in this sort of cold materialistic science universe where they observe the universe as a fixed, cold, dark mechanism that's just turning and turning. And then there's another paradigm that's still, being introduced and not fully adopted yet, which is where that probably that frustration comes from, right? Of understanding that the universe, it's like going back to the Hermetic principles of like
Exactly.
the mind of God.
Yes.
It is all one organic, interconnected,
Yes.
interwoven living system.
And what sealed it for Hermes was the caduceus, which in physics today is called phase conjugation. And that's that cascade of the golden spiral down that cone, which is implosive. In physics, it's fashionable, call it entanglement, but perfected, that's embedding, and that's precisely what phase conjugation charge implosion is. So that is exactly what Hermes was about. I find it encouraging that so many of the plasma universe physicists today believe in angels, but very few of them actually have taken the physics to heart. When I set up the lab that became Gaia TV and assembled the video section there. And at that time, my boss was Rick Hasson, who produced the movie Stargate. And for the movie Stargate, they used the letters of the Ophanim-Enochian alphabet, which John Dee had discovered by scrying into what we now know as a phase conjugate dielectric scrying stone called the show stone, which is basically implosive capacitor. It's similar to what Nostradamus learned, the coding he had to put on the bottom of his water cup in order to see the future, and why the Olmec use a black obsidian stone to see their ancestors. It's called a phase conjugate dielectric, literally a phase conjugate mirror. Anyway, the letters that from Ophanim-Enochian that the scrying John Dee and Kelly saw in that stone were they call it the alphabet of angels, and we have a whole website and showing a bunch of pictures, goldenmean.info/Ophanim. The point is that alphabet used to make the movie Stargate of the Ophanim-Enochian, it's an indirect derivative of Greek actually, turns out to be the shadow of the spiral on a vortex tilted in the symmetry of a hypercube. In other words, it's how to focus plasma donuts into an array to make them implode, literally. So what that Stargate was, quite literally, was a foci of plasma domains imploding accurately. Now, that's literally what a Stargate is. So, I hear that you're teaching something about the ET history on some of your films online, which I think is wonderful. We claim to have some pretty personal context and that sort of thing. But one part of that story, if you look at the secret space program details, originally Jason Rice, but more useful recently would be Robert Woods at Gaia TV, talking about the secret space program. And they talk about going through these space stargates, portals all the time. And everyone assumes that, oh, this is kind of science fiction, and when they said, beam me up Scotty, no electrical engineer on this planet ever imagined we'd know the physics, but I am here to tell you we do know the physics, actually. And yeah. And that, remember when Billy Myers who was beamed up by the Pleiadians, who was asked getting some Jossie over Lake Majore, I was sort of there. On the day that he was emotionally upset, they had to beam him up a different way, which was very painful because of the geometry of the field of his emotions. Now that's a bit of a clue, actually. Like supposing you're getting ready to die or have bliss, it's about the same thing. And you're sorting your emotions in order they can withstand compression, called black hole of death. And if you're angry about something, which is literally electrically a wave that is not shareable, cannot be propagated, cannot be compressed well, cannot implode, then stargates ain't gonna work. That's why, not in the same way. Because implosive compression is how you get acceleration from compression. That's why we have that whole new lesson about, are the scientists of Earth going to continue to embarrass us? Because since they do not know why a piezo, water, or mercury vortex makes gravity, not only do they not know why any object falls to the ground and do not know why the Nazis won the war, but they can never learn the physics of the origin of life force consciousness. And of course, the ETs are going to continue to regard us as not a galactically shareable civilization. So in effect, we're kept in the Stone Ages until our physicists know why a vortex makes gravity.
Wow. Okay. Wait, there's so many places I want to go with this. So first of all, I've heard you speak about, okay, wait. You brought up the ETs and you brought up this whole thing. I listened to one of your videos recently and you were talking about the Anunnaki and the Ark of the Covenant, and you were talking about both the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail being these like ancient artifacts, especially the Ark of the Covenant being like some sort of reactor Anunnaki technology or something. Can you describe a little bit more about that?
We know a whole lot. Well, first of all, there were a bunch of arcs. Most of it was Syrian technology. The Syrians at that time were famous for selling guns to both sides of the war, but the physics were the alternate layers of gold plus acacia wood. The acacia is a very high dielectric for capacitance, and the geometry based on golden ratio is implosive capacitance. It's clearly the physics. And the arc, called the Mercy seat, is related to where plasma can have a concentric foci. And of course, being high voltage implosive capacitance, there was electrical hygiene required. The primary function originally was because the Anunnakis, really that branch of the Draco, and the Draco is a huge family, very complicated family. I recommend Anton Parks. But they were too stupid to get through the Van Allen belts without nuking their way through. That's the truth. And so they needed some place to store the nukes, and that's the origin of the ark, actually. And that's why when they called it the plague of Azoth in Egypt, what they meant was radiation poisoning, Azoth meaning nitrogen, bit of a long story. But the other physics is that implosive capacitance reduces radioactivity measurably. And the fact that our physics community hasn't talked about that indicates incredible stupidity, actually. So once you know why implosive capacitance reduces radioactivity, you can start to get a clue about the cause of gravity and why nuclear materials are dramatically affected by magnetic line crosses. So that was one of the original functions. But a correlate function was gold powder production, because the stability of the electron orbital of monoatomics is greatly enhanced by implosive capacitance, et cetera. So yes, you did get the Holy Communion. It was actually monoatomic gold.
Interesting. So, okay, then on the other hand, the Holy Grail, and then we're gonna talk about gravity because this is a big thing. But the Holy Grail, I mean, that's like the cup of Christ, right? Like, what was that in your understanding?
Well, for that, we're just going to have to drag out a visual because nothing else.
Yes, please.
I'm going to goldenmean.info/Grail, and I mapped my original equation for the spiral that makes the radii of hydrogen and DNA, and I rotated it. So you see that's what it is, basically. You take that golden spiral down that cone and you rotate. Now, if you were to continue that rotation, I think this is a bigger, this completes the visual here. So it is a cup within a cup. Actually, these are only partial vision.
I see it.
And it refers.
I see it.
It basically, it's the result of infinite stellation of Dodecaecosa, what we today call our Star Mother kit. There's a picture there. And there's all kinds of visions. So this is all at goldenmean.info/Grail, okay? So what that means, when they said the Grail is in the blood, actually what they meant was the possibility of charge implosion, which can be gravity making, levitating. A clue here is when the Israelis called the virtually unlimited concentric unpacking of the fractal phase conjugate dielectric electron shells of monoatomic gold. They called it the plains of Sharon, which is their word for heaven. Lawrence Gardner got this part right. They were actually correct. Heaven means hey ave, where the breath of charge takes flight. It means literally a fractal field. And there are certain limitations to where that is and is not possible. And that is the only geometry which allows the propagation of mind. And that is important. So when we say, you know, physicists today are just coming around. There's the latest physics article is, physicists think the whole universe might be conscious. And then and they're shocked. And then they say, and physicists are now beginning to think that the mind might be related to an electric field. What a shock. But when actually what is conscious is every wave node that is implosive capacitively and therefore participates in that radio array, that fractal field. That's why we say go out and make a magnetic map of your bed and your garden and your city and make it all look like a rose, and you got it. You can lucid dream that.
Whoa. Okay. I think, okay, we're piecing together a lot of things here. So gravity. Now, I in another one of your videos I watched recently, you were describing, and you mentioned it a little bit here too, I think, is like the way that, Tesla argued against a lot of the other mainstream physics, and Einstein, who believed that space was curved. And so Tesla was more on the mindset that space was not curved. And this is also something I've heard you speak about. And then that relates with gravity, of like what causes gravity, because of course the theories of gravity relate with the curvature of space and then the density of matter. So I'm wondering if you can just take us into that, like what is space, what is gravity, and how does it work with this vortex you're talking about?
Well, you're asking all the right questions, and they're such light, easy questions too. No,
you're like, this is a cakewalk, child's play.
So that physics is best summarized at fractalfield.com/vacuum energy. Okay, and I'm showing you here. Here's my new equation for the new proof of how hydrogen is fractal and the reason hydrogen makes gravity. I proved that if you take Planck times integer exponents of golden ratio, you produce the hydrogen radii. So this is now a new map of what hydrogen looks like, and the reason that hydrogen is fractal and the way it makes gravity. It's a center of water bond in every electron, every DNA ladder rung center. So the vortex that's induced down that cone. This is this picture that we just shared. The challenge to Earth scientists that a vortex, in this case a mercury vortex, Vimana Nazi Bell Hanabu, which is a gravity-making device, and the way the Nazis won the war and conquered the South Pole and kicked Admiral Byrd out, and now own also the asteroid outside of Ceres, and they're big trouble. And humans are considered a virus because we were so stupid as to let them get away, because our scientists didn't know why an object fell to the ground. And so the cause of gravity is one view. The cause of gravity is right here. This is now proven to be the geometry of hydrogen right here. And as these waves add and multiply recursively, constructively, the charge phase velocities, in that geometry of compression, the compression of charge becomes acceleration of charge towards center. Because remember, the phase velocities are adding and multiplying constructively, recursively, which only golden ratio allows, perfected fractality, self-similarity, named phase conjugation. And therefore, that acceleration of charge produced towards center is named the gravity. Now, we have extensive equations published, and here's some of our publications on the physics here. Go down here, this is one of our publications, How Fractality Causes Gravity, published with my mathematics partner, Martin Jones. Fractal golden ratio, phase conjugation, cause of gravity, the equations. And this is the other. Compression is the hydrogen atom in and phase conjugation. Again, cause of gravity. So we've done the homework. We've actually done the physics. But publishing these physics papers is fun, and you can rattle cages, da-da-da. Our real fun, though, is we make technologies. And that's really when the world comes knocking at your door, when you actually apply these things. So anyway, here is my equation. Planck, in the top left here, Planck length and time times golden ratio raised to the integer n produces 3 exact radii of hydrogen, the exact dimension of ADP, adenosine diphosphate, the most important molecule in the body, and the only 2 exact precise frequencies that make photosynthesis happen, exactly the British foot, almost exactly the harmonics of the Schumann cascade and the brainwave cascade for bliss, exactly the frequency of the LF component called the Mayer wave, the most important resonance frequency in the blood, 0.09 or 0.1 hertz. It produces the Earth year, Venus year, galactic year, and precessional year. This line is called The Origin of Biologic Negentropy, the title of my book. And that's actually the only path out of chaos, and the reason the universe is not condemned to entropy. Here's the 2 frequencies that make photosynthesis possible. Notice photosynthesis possible is only at these 2 very narrow peaks, which turn out to be exactly golden ratio times Planck. So I have proven that photosynthesis is simply phase conjugate charge implosion, and therefore negentropy. You take those harmonics, you get here the Schumann harmonics, you get the brainwave harmonics that make bliss, and this goes on and on. So let's review now how we answered your question. The cause of gravity is fractality. There's lots of physicists already for years who've been agreeing that fractality causes gravity because they know that infinite non-destructive compression is the origin of gravity in the unified field. Einstein said that. What he did not know is what a fractal field was. And physics did not know what a fractal field is until I wrote my new equation. So physics already knew that fractality is the cause of gravity. They just didn't know what a fractal field was until me.
Okay, so what is a fractal field then?
Remember the Grail animation?
Yeah.
I'm done. I've answered your question.
Okay.
That dodecahedral shape is the shape of hydrogen. It's the stellations that result in the atomic table, origin of DNA, Earth grid, zodiac, every living protein, Einstein's foundation stone. And the reason is because the stellations of the dodeca, every X, Y, and Z node is a simple integral exponent golden ratio.
Okay, so let's take this and make this really practical for someone who's just listening to this, who maybe doesn't understand all of the physics, including myself, because there's a lot of details here that I'm kind of like, whoa, there's a lot here. So let's take for something like the sun, for example, right? Like we have all these models. It's really, really big, and therefore it bends space. That's the old mainstream paradigm. You're talking about, if I'm understanding even moderately correctly, and please fill in the gaps here, you're talking about like the way that the things orbit the sun is basically this energetic fractal field that's coming from the sun, the sun is creating a vortex that is drawing in things around it, or what?
A lovely way to ask the question. First, let's be clear. Space-time is not bent. That language is crap, really confusing, and not helpful. What needs to be clear is the universe is comprised of a single contiguous compressible media. You could call it ether, but the more correct term is compressible charge. It behaves simply like a superfluid. Everyone who studied this knows this. Even Nassim gets this part right. And that superfluid, when that rotates, when that charge, compressible, rotates, the rotation of that charge stores inertia, which is the only definition of mass. When that rotation of charge has a period, it is the only definition of time. So time is simply relative charge rotation rate, nothing else. Never was. And Einstein jumped into a whole nest of stupidity and confusion. Remember, he said action at a distance was spooky because he didn't understand any of this and never had a clue why objects fall to the ground. I'm not picking on the poor guy, made great contributions, but he screwed up on some important things. So just to get it straight, space-time is not bent. What, in fact, gravity does is bend the wavefront of the charge wave trajectory. That's all it does. So, for example, the reason a clock speeds up when you accelerate is simple. More of the transverse inertia of that charge rotating is then compressed down into increased rotation rate, which is called time.
Okay. So you're kind of saying, okay, let me see if I'm getting this right. You're saying that basically all things in existence are all spiraling and
absolutely
fractaling and vorticing,
yes.
And that the increase of when you're like accelerating, the increase of time is really just the compression of that vortex.
It's the compression of spin rate. Time is a name for the period of rotation, nothing else, nothing. So you measure rate of your rotation rate, that period, you call that time. That's all it is. That's all it ever was. And the reason your whole life passes through you just before death in front of you is you compress time. Correct. What you've done is death has to be a compression electric black hole, because that's the only way you can accelerate through into the longitudinal array, which your spirit knows is the only way to go into the collective unconscious. And you don't get there unless you qualify.
Okay, so I want to. Okay, that's actually the next area I want to go into is death and retaining your memories and going through death and this passage. Yes. The one question I have before we do that is, you're talking about building just because it's on the subject of gravity. You're talking about building technologies into the world. Do you have the ability to build an anti-gravity car, ship or device?
Yeah, we've seen many of our friends float, and we know the physics of that in the physics of Kundalini. You can see the physics of gravity at fractalfield.com/conjugate gravity. You can see examples of it applied to propulsion technology at fractalfield.com/propulsion. All of the links are indexfractalfield.com, including the YouTube channel. I must say that's a bit crude. When you rotate piezoelectrically charged water down a vortex. We made a few ounces. We bought a $1,000 pump. We learned later there's a way to do it with an aquarium pump. But you can make a vortex to make some gravity. And if you use liquid mercury and dope it with a iron powder with a special solubility wetting agent called red liquid, the physics of the Hanabu Nazi bell Vimana, you can make a whole bunch more gravity. But it's dangerous and messy and crude by comparison. If you take a quartz crystal called Koski frost and you pump an RF pump wave into it, they measured 800 times its own weight in gravity. You can read the Koski frost book at fractalfield.com/propulsion, okay? And the reason that makes gravity is because that quartz crystal z-axis is helical, and that's called rotating a conjugator. And once you begin to get that story, you can actually learn about technologies that would enable our planet to qualify to be interstellar, actually. For example, why in Star Trek, I think it was called the lithium niobate crystals. It's actually like a barium strontium titanate. These are phase conjugate dielectric crystals, and they pump wave into them. And so what they called impulse power was the vortex, and what they called warp power was actually the charged crystal. But we're into something much more sophisticated than that, actually, which is called a rotating conjugator. I can give you just a simple example. The hottest subject in all of chemistry, Buckminster fullerenes, I knew Bucky quite well. They're stellated eccosa, and they're phase conjugate implosive capacitors, and they have a magic spot at the middle. But if you can make them pure enough and create the layering correctly in the right dielectric material and then rotate, you make both gravity and propulsion in a very elegant way, which makes every other form of energy and transport on this planet look like the Stone Ages, clearly.
So in that case, you're talking about building it with technology, but you also said you've seen, your friends float. Do you know a way then to just do this with your own body so that it's not just like you're not making a thing, but you just have reached out? Is that what the science of ascension is for you? Like at least one step of it is being able to just generate gravity waves yourself through your body?
Remember that when the TM people show the siddhi of floating, they're measuring brain coherence, but not heart coherence. And it's a crude introduction of Kundalini, but I've been having intense Kundalini for 30 to 40, 50 years. Let's not count, please. But Kundalini feels like a red hot lightning bolt going up your tailbone and coming out the top of your head like a bolt of lightning. That's sort of what it feels like. And it's a rainmaker, and it's pretty colorful. And the physics is all articulated quite well from Benthoff. goldenmean.info/Kundalini. It's a phase conjugate phonon cascade up the spine liquid pump. And you have the ventricle horns and the phonon wave and the triggering of the pineal. We know the physics pretty well. So yes, you feel like liftoff. It's true. Again, very crude by comparison to what's necessary. But, that's not how I would like to travel. Actually, that's not even an elegant way to travel, but it's very instructive to learn the physics. Let's think more clearly here. When we said the charge bubble around your body, I have the picture handy where they take pictures of ghosts leaving the body. By the way, they get those pictures in the woods, fine. But you try to do it in the city? No, we know why. So you see these pictures of these ghosts leaving the body at the moment of death. Those pictures are very common. But we now know the physics of that. We know where ghosts go after death. We've measured that. By the way, there's a cold spot. We know why. And we know where they go and why. They're looking for charge implosion because it's the only way they can accelerate to propagate into the longitudinal array, the collective unconscious. Otherwise, they're stuck ghosts, right? And so look at this physics more practically. The plasma domain you call your spirit body when you're lucid dreaming and when you're dead is actually a plasma donut, quite literally. And your ability to navigate that body is the real bottom line of your present question, because that's the only actual skill that matters. And if you're a plasma donut, how do you steer?
It's a good question.
Well, if you take the spiral down that vortex cone, being implosive, it's a gravity maker. So if you know how to tilt the angle of that spiral correctly, you could get the vectors you need for navigation. Now, if you take the shadow of that take the shadow of that self-organizing golden spiral on that torus, we have all the animation, we'll think about it later, but and you look at that same spiral by the shadows cast by a tetrahedron, the shadows are Hebrew and Sanskrit. So by visualizing those letters accurately, you fill the plasma domain of your optical cortex, and that becomes your propulsion vector index.
Okay, so there's a lot here. You've talked a little bit about these ghosts though, and the passage of death, and it seems very relative to the going through the vortex, the charge implosion. I don't even know how to describe it. Can like this is a big question. Like there's people, there's children who.
There's the ghost.
Oh wow.
Go ahead.
There's children who have who are born and they retain their memories of past lives, and they're like so clearly, oh yeah, this happened. And there seems to be this like kind of recurring theme of like most commonly is like you die and you reincarnate, but you go through this memory loss of the past life. So what is the secret to going through
exactly
death and retaining your memories? How does one do that?
Congratulations for asking precisely the right question. And I would like to suggest an electrical engineer's answer, actually. This is Korotkov measuring where the ghost goes after death. Looking for the place of what's called place of power, place of charge implosion in the room, because from that place they can gain the implosive inertia needed for charge distribution if death's black hole was not implosive enough. And this is the measurement of the time it takes for your aura to leave the body after death, 10 and 36 hours. They use cadavers. It's very accurate, and we know why and when. This is the sequence of visions you see at death called the Heinrich-Klüver form constants, lattice cobweb tunnel spiral, literally the map to successful death. This is why this is what you see at the time of death, because it's the sequence of the braiding algorithms required for your DNA to implode and get you through the speed of light into a longitudinal array. Examples of this would be why surgeons with Ray Moody have so well proven that death visions are electrically contagious, especially successful death. So what needs to happen is you arrange an electrical black hole. So the alternate Machu Picchu would be an example of a good place to die, and most hospitals where the electrosmog is horrible would be an example of hell. But there's a certain geometry required to get through that array. There's another little picture I wanted to use here. Where'd it go? That what's happening when you line up to go down that spiral. Too many pictures. When you line up to go down that spiral array, there's a propagation threshold. Oh, here, I missed the animation of DNA braiding, didn't I? Yeah, that was the DNA braid animation I was supposed to show you. But wait, oh yes, and you asked about the heart of the sun. Just going through the images quick. But when clairvoyants look at the heart of the sun, which is cool and inviting, and it's an organ of perception, it's literally an eyeball, plasma-wise. And this is what they see. They call Anu, 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside, which actually, the 7 spins is tetracubic axis of symmetry, and the 5 spins is dodecacosa. And that, when you nest one within the other, you get charge implosion. So that slip knot is what the clairvoyants saw at the heart of the sun, the heart of the human. This is the heart of the human, 7 spins outside, and the heart of hydrogen. The same thing, that perfect implosive slip knot. And that's how plasma balls become self-aware, quite literally. And it's that perfect nesting. And you get this array. But there was another picture I wanted to use here. Ooh. Oh, here it is. Sorry about that. So basically, the electrical components of your body enter here as a transverse way of going up and down. And after implosion, they go through the speed of light and propagate longitudinally like a compression wave, like at right. And in that array, if you can stabilize the foci within that array, literally your attention, then you take memory through death. A perfect example would be studying the physics, and I do mean physics, of lucid dreaming and astral projection. If you can lucid dream, you will take memory through death. If you can't lucid dream, probably you won't. And we know now that since the implosion field of our therapy so dramatically triggers lucid dreaming because it makes longitudinal wave embedding, we know that it works.
Okay, so I'm going to make an analogy here and tell me if this is accurate. Like it's almost as if you have, let's say you have this big, you have a hole. Here's life and here's death, and there's a hole between those two things. And in order to get yourself from one side to the other intact, you have to essentially go into a vortex, like spiral yourself into a particular geometric pattern that goes, very small, to be able to pass through that intact. And otherwise, it's kind of like taking, trying to force everything through that hole, and only a tiny little thing comes through, and all of your memories just kind of dissolve. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but does that make sense? Is that accurate?
Well, it's a bit of an intro, but I think we can be a lot more elegant in the description. First of all, let's emphasize that
definitely that was a terrible analogy. I'm doing my best here.
But first of all, let's emphasize that we're describing the physics of both successful birth and successful death, and it's the same as the physics of successful bliss, actually. And all are simply implosive compression. Also remember that what you're calling your spirit body memory is a plasma donut that just happens to inhabit your body. And your body is designed to make that bigger. That's why every decision you make in life should be about, does it make my aura bigger? That's the simple criterion for every decision you make in your whole life, and then you're on track. Otherwise, you're off track. And your aura is measurable. It's not subjective. This is GDB and other devices. This is good technology. So this is what's called feeding the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit is a charge envelope. So when you need to propagate the foci of the plasma domain that was doing perception inside your body and doing it outside your body, that foci needs to get implosively coherent enough to sustain. It's like the liquid that you thought was insoluble in another liquid, and you spin the one row inside the other, and suddenly the thread reappears as a totally insoluble liquid. So what makes you insoluble inside that collective unconscious? And I can give you a clue. It is that part of your memory that contains pure principle or survival memory. That shareable wave is the only thing you can take with you, because that fractal electric field, collective unconscious, is simply DNA radio's plasma cloud, which has been collecting survival library info for 1 billion years. And compression acceleration gets
okay.
you. Yeah.
So let me ask you a little bit about this on the subject of lucid dreaming and astral travel, which it seems to be very similar in principle to the proper execution of death and birth, and like retaining your memories on the other side. It's probably similar to retaining your dreams, like remembering your dreams afterwards. I'm wondering, when you have a lucid dream or you have an astral experience, and you're, there's this idea of like maybe you're going inside, or it's a mirror, or it's a window. You're going out into this, great other dimension. And I'm wondering if you can speak to like, where are you going when that happens? Or you take ayahuasca, or you take DMT, you go into this other dimension and you're meeting other beings. Like, where is that? And I know you've spoken a bit about dark matter in other videos of yours, but how dark matter is just not understood, and doesn't really exist in the way that people think it does. Can you speak to this at all? And like, where do you go when you lucid dream or when you astral travel?
Yeah, I'm highly opinionated in this subject as an electrical engineer, and I say the concept of dark matter was a stupidity invented by physicists who found more gravity they could account for. So everywhere there's extra gravity, they say dark matter, because they haven't a clue of why objects fall to the ground. That's the only reason dark matter. Once you understand why the masses of the universe are arranged dodecahedrally to stabilize gravity, suddenly the extra gravity becomes clear, and the concept of dark matter is revealed as the stupidity of physicists who couldn't figure out why an object falls to the ground. That's you asked my opinion, I get. But now, your question about where do you go is very useful. Remember when the first lessons of a shaman or a remote viewer, always that wherever there was a peak emotion or a earth grid sacred node, a sacred space. We know what sacred space is now. We've measured it. It's fractal air. It's charge compression. It's where Kogis went to phone ancestors. We've measured it. We know what it is. So where there's been peak emotions or sacred sites, that has to do with where you go. Effectively, you go into an array and you inhabit an array, and that array must be phase conjugate or fractal or look like a rose. Those are the only arrays that work. So it's going to be very, very difficult to translate your vorticity into an array that sustains compression named attention if you're trying to die in a big city in a metal hospital full of electrosmog. Sorry, soul fractionation, bad idea. Now, you know, they say this native Indian spirit, the Seneca, went down the Niagara Falls and then her spirit inhabits. That is good physics. That is an array that's electrically inhabitable. Okay.
So are you saying then that like that this physical reality would be considered an array, and then the non-dimensional fourth dimension, fifth dimension, or other places, that's another array, or that's another part of an array?
The only thing we're naming higher dimensions is the places where more axes of charge spin symmetry can be superposed, measurable in the number of harmonic inclusiveness at the nodes. For example, heart rate variability, measuring immune health. So the next dimension is simply the nodes in the array where more charge rotations are superposed. Start with stellating a dodecahedron, you get a flavor here. So the spin densities which are possible there and the multi-connected topology enabled there, which we now know is a phase conjugate array, which is a longitudinal nodal array. Remember, those compressional longitudinal nodes can only bounce at the nodes of the stellated dodeca. That's the only place they can bounce. So yeah, they can go faster than light. And yes, you can do plasma containment at a distance, the holy grail of fusion research. If you understand microwave longitudinal interferometry, the plasma fusion research is crude on this planet until longitudinal interferometry. And Tom Bearden had that right. So the point is, you inhabit an array. To do it well, you know that the nodal geometry of that array is critical to where you enter and where you exit.
Okay. Some of that made sense. I want to ask too, like, you probably get this all the time. And I was watching one of your interviews recently with someone else, and they were like, I think I understood about 1% of that, and I need to study it more. And this seems like it's probably a fairly common thing, because it almost seems like you're very ahead of your time in terms of what people generally understand and what people are capable of comprehending and speaking to very advanced levels of physics and sacred geometry and understanding. And so my question for you then is, you know, in the spirit of being able to share this information with as many people as possible, how would you describe this work in a way that is, you know, simplified to practicality for people? You know, is it just love is the answer, or like what could you give people that would be maybe a little bit simplified? You know what I mean?
Well, you know, we've been teaching the physics of consciousness for over 30 years, and I might be the most experienced teacher. I'm certainly the most YouTubed teacher on the planet. There must be a million out there, I think, if you search on Dan Winter. And we always ended those courses with a section on hygiene. And that section might be a little bit boring by comparison, but that's the actual homework, actually. The hygiene is simply learning that every time you attract charge, the quality of grace, as it were, when your hair stands up, your aura grows a little bit and you gain the necessary inertia. And every time you lose charge, like somebody touched Jesus's cloak and he said, you know, somebody's drawing charge from my aura, you know, very sensitive. Yeah. So the ability to build an aura, that's the only hygiene instruction I have. But then that has a dietary component and environmental component. And if you're living in a metal building in electrosmog with bad air, I'm sorry, you're not going to get immortal. It's not going to happen. And if you're eating dead food, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're thinking unshareable thoughts, you know, if you're not doing your exercise and your yoga, if you're not learning to deep breathe, it's all relevant.
Okay. Well, I mean, in the spirit of that, like, that's really beautiful. I know we only have about 9 minutes left here in our, in our hour. So can we focus a little bit more on that too? Cause I want to take all of this and be able to make it very useful for people, so that there's like a takeaway, like, because there's so much we've looked at. And I feel like the best thing for people who are really, really gung-ho on going down the rabbit hole with you here is really to like go and check you out on YouTube, watch all of your content and start studying. And I think I want to do the same thing. And I want to talk to you after as well about maybe doing a collaboration, like a spirit science cartoon about this material, because it's so fun and we could do a little cartoon of you. But like, in the spirit of that practicality, I think that'll be even useful for me. One of the things you mentioned was this like, you know, being in a city surrounded by metal. What is it about metal that cancels the spiritual energy?
It's the physics of biologic architecture. Ours is the most sophisticated biologic architecture curriculum on the planet. We're the first ones to teach architects to learn whether they deserve a paycheck if their building has a correct electric field to cause a seed to grow. And we show 3 forms of measurement, golden mean.info/architecture, and implosive capacitance in buildings is destroyed the more steel and aluminum is in that building. And the physics is simple. The dielectric constant is wrong. The capacitive charge of your aura cannot propagate through it. Literally, your aura cannot breathe. So that if the walls are made of biological material, high dielectric constant, because the molecules in biological material learn to get fractal or get dead, and so they achieve charge distribution efficiency, the definition of life, high dielectric constant. So wood and natural fabric, et cetera, and natural stone, creates a capacitive field that your aura can unpack into, and you can literally inhabit the space. So the steel aluminum, if you just put something aluminum in your hand, you feel your aura die immediately just when you touch it. It's because the capacitance is a total sink for your aura, which is why the coins in your pocket heat so quickly. Your aura.
Interesting. So do you think this sounds like it relates with, in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean, he describes that how, the realm of the curves was where he was able to ascend and, travel through time and space, but the realm of angles were sharp with demons. And it sounds like the realm of angles is kind of like speaking to like inside of a city where everything's so structured and ordered. There's no curves. There's no organic life. Is that relative?
Well, geomancy in the Chinese sense has always taught that sharp corners were evil geomantically, and they were indirectly right, because the sharp corner will bleed capacitance. So the issue is to conserve capacitance and not bleed the charge. That's the reason that sharp corners are evil in geomancy, actually. And perfect curvature is non-destructive self-reentry, obviously golden mean spiral implosion. And that non-destructive self-reentry is the only definition of the origin of self-awareness.
Interesting. Okay. So you say for people listening, then, like, the best place to live would be outside of a city, at the very least on the edge of the city, but ideally in nature, somewhere like out of a city.
Well, there's a few, like in Prague, we were able to lucid dream dramatically better, but classically the Prague magnetic map, and these pictures of Golden Mean / Bohemia and Prague, the magnetic map of Prague originally is a rose, literally, and the lucid dreaming is much better there. And that's where—
that makes sense. Yeah.
That's where John Dee set out on the 7 hills of Prague and made the storm that took out the Spanish Armada that he announced to Queen Elizabeth a year before he made that storm. The
okay. So it really has to do with the geometry of the city itself.
The magnetic map. That's why the real biological architects, they make a magnetic map of the land, and then they look about embedding, and they put no metal even in the foundation, and they create this beautiful capacitor. For example, bricks that are baked at a lower temperature have a better dielectric, and you can have more blissful, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, yeah. And so like coupling, environment with health, I mean, like deep breathing, meditation, exercise, generally eating, would you recommend, like, as a vegan, vegetarian? I noticed that a lot of the traditional ancient, Greek and Egyptian mystery schools were, at least a lot of the writings speak to vegetarian as opposed to vegan.
It's
true. Do you have any thoughts on that?
The pain the animal experience at the moment of death is a debt you have to pay when you eat it, for sure. Now, the shaman knew how to make a contract with the fish they caught with a lucid dreaming the night before, and they could consume a fish and do honor to its memory, but it's not easy. And
interesting. That's fascinating.
So the physics here is quite clear that mostly vegan is necessary. You need spin density and life force. And a key principle here is that I tell the story, but the DNA in the corn of the Hopi, who would call the wind every time I was there, but the DNA in the corn you can get today is death. I mean, it's poison. You get so much mucus. And most of the grains on this planet right now, the DNA is screaming in pain, and that's why it generates so much mucus. So you need to talk to what you're going to eat and ask, when was the last time you experienced genetic diversity? And that's when the DNA sings. That DNA of the Hopi was a pet puppy, and it responded to singing, and
Is when you say that what was the word? Genetic diversity?
Genetic.
Last time
genetic.
Oh, genetic. Could you also, in a more like maybe that flowing feminine sense, could you simply say, when was the last time you experienced love? Would that have the same, was that the same effect?
Well, yeah, but there's regenerative agriculture now, which is focused on genetic diversity. And genetic diversity is what gets DNA singing. And the DNA can literally be blissful, and it can be the opposite. I thought there was one more area we should talk about, which is the kinesthetic, sort of the yoga and the sacred gymnastic of bliss.
Yeah.
And my bliss experience started, as I told this story before, but I was in the Gurdjieff school, age 21, quit IBM systems analyst. And I started having bliss experiences doing Gurdjieff sacred gymnastic. And then I started having intense, erotic Kundalini and double Scorpio and blowing out your head and tailbone. I mean, it's pretty intense stuff. And, a lot of people are diagnosed insane from Kundalini appropriately. Kundalini psychosis or transcendence. Bentov and Lisa and Ella were friends there. But my teacher, Bentov, I had just done graduate psychophysiology, so I learned the physics of Kundalini. And the most important point about that is simply, once you get to the charge peak of your day, and then you find the power point in your place, and you learn to get stiller and stiller and realize your attention is centripetal, you start to build a kind of implosion that lights that fire inside, and then you feel that lightning, and then ultimately you inhabit a lightning bolt. And after 30 years of that is why I can talk fast.
That's funny. Also very wise, it's a funny twist at the end. Okay. So I guess, you spoke a little bit here just about just like yoga and the gymnastics and this and that. I've often heard that, part of the doing, even now, traditionally yoga is often like meditation, right? Like there all the different kinds of yoga. And then one of the kinds of yoga that's popular in the West is like doing the poses, and that the poses are like matching your body to various sacred geometric forms that allows for the energy to flow through you more. So you would probably say it's good to be just doing all of that, right?
Well, yes. And the physics of accreting capacitance with a movement is that if the curvature of the angle of that spiral you make with a piece of your body is correct, you feel a tingle, a burning in the tip of your finger at the moment you came to the still point in that spiral. And you've actually imploded charge capacitance, they call chi. And that ability to do that massively, it leads to this idea that your body can become this steerer of tornadoes, actually. And the hygiene for that, we've articulated pretty well at goldenmean.info/Kundalini.
Wow. Well, Dan, we've hit our hour mark here, but I've been just blown away by this conversation. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our listeners with? Everybody who's watching and tuning in right now. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with them?
Well, so many people are worried about politics or the extraterrestrial presence, or where is the history of humanity going?
Sure.
But actually, I think if each one of us focused more on getting to our inner stillness every day, a little bit more discipline about your diet and your yoga and your Tai Chi every day, and that inner stillness creates a centripetal force inside you. And then gradually that links you to other people in a fractal array of the planet, and there's more touching and more love, and we feel each other. We know what it is to feel each other now. It's actually embeddability. And so the true physics of spirit is profoundly unifying. It combines all religions perfectly, actually. And it really brings us in the context where we can enter the extraterrestrial community with the right science to understand our own ensoulment. Just one last thought here. We know that when the Draco caused the Drays to abduct a lot of the people after the Roswell incident, that 90% of the people they abducted had some indigenous blood, which meant they were lucid dreamers. Means the kind of DNA the ETs needed, who were trying to be parasites on humanity, has been going on for 1,000 years, was the lucid dreamers. And why were the indigenous people the lucid dreamers? They lived on the same land for 100 or 1,000 generations, and their DNA became fractal to the soil. So that's earthing, the book, magnified to the point of implosive grounding. And then they were lucid dreamers. And that, you know, you see that Aboriginal sitting there and he's manipulating a storm at a distance with his mind because he's seeing that longitudinal array, the dream track song line. And that kind of coherence, you know, enough of those kids doing that work, and, you know, every military on this planet is completely obsolete.
Wow. I feel like just listening to you has compelled me to bring more presence to my own breath, and my own energetic field and my own love just by listening. So I want to say thank you for your presence and thank you for your time here. It really means the world to me. And let's definitely do this again, because I think we haven't even scratched the surface of everywhere that we could go. So you've linked a lot of you've shared a lot of your links throughout the course of this talk so far. But just for, you know, for people listening one final time, what's the best place that they can find you at?
Main index is fractalfield.com for all of the latest conversations. Our brainwave bliss technology, flameinmind.com, which is also the breath trainer, iThrive.com. The water implosion tech, theimploder.com. The plasma tech, which is amazing, therify.net, true lucid dreaming and healing plasma. And our technology, implosiongroup.com. So yeah, we, you know, our YouTube channel is approaching your YouTube channel. We share. Come and see us.
Fabulous. Awesome. Daniel, thank you so much for this call, for this joining me on this podcast. And I look forward to having you on again and talking to you more in the future.
I really like your smile and your attitude. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's become a shareable wave.
Let's do that.
Okay. Blessing.
So we can stop the recording. Before you go, I wanted to just very briefly say that two things. One, if you haven't already, you can send like all of your links very cleanly. Just send it to Selena, unless she already has it. And we'll make sure that all those links are like everywhere that this podcast shows up. But then also, if you are interested in doing a collaboration together with Spirit Science and having like a Spirit Science Dan Winter special, having an animated version of you, like a 10-minute video, just like explaining something very complex or making something complex simple. We would love to collaborate with you on something like that.
Well, that could be fun. I'd like to do more focused on real science of Kundalini, introducing science of ascension, and then separately one more on the much more detail on the ET history, because we get big pieces of that puzzle. So we could have some.
I love that. Yeah. Could we set up? Would you mind if we set up a call maybe next week sometime, or there's no rush really, but at some point between us and then my writer, who's like a writer researcher who can help kind of work with you a little bit more closely in like getting a script together?
Sure. I look forward to it. You have my link,
okay.
My phone number. I'll send them again.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Blessings. Thank you so much. Have a good day.